The Grand Council chamber fell silent as Queen Elena entered, her royal blue gown trailing behind her across the polished marble floor. Captain Lucas Kane stood at attention near the massive oak doors, his uniform pristine, his expression unreadable. 27 years of service had taught him to read every shift in palace politics, every whisper that carried danger. The assembled nobles rose from their seats, bowing deeply as their sovereign took her place at the head of the ornate table. Duke Harrison cleared his throat, shuffling through his papers with obvious nervousness. Ambassador Martinez adjusted his spectacles, while Lord Bennett drummed his fingers against the table's edge. "Your Majesty," Duke Harrison began, his voice carrying across the vaulted ceiling, "we must discuss the territorial dispute with the northern provinces. The situation has become quite delicate." Captain Kane noticed the subtle tension in the Queen's shoulders, the way her fingers pressed against the armrest of her chair. 3 decades of diplomatic experience had taught her to mask her emotions, but Lucas had spent years learning to read the signs others missed. "The farmers are refusing to pay the increased taxes," Ambassador Martinez added, sliding a document across the table. "They claim the new rates are unreasonable given the poor harvest season." Queen Elena nodded slowly, her green eyes scanning the faces around the table. "What do our advisors recommend?" Lord Bennett leaned forward, his bulk straining against his ceremonial robes. "Military intervention, Your Majesty. A show of force would remind them of their obligations to the crown." The suggestion hung in the air like smoke from a dying fire. Captain Kane shifted his weight almost imperceptibly, his hand resting near his ceremonial sword, not from any threat in the room, but from the weight of responsibility that pressed against his shoulders. "And what of the harvest reports?" Queen Elena asked, her voice calm but carrying an edge that made several nobles glance toward each other. "Have we verified their claims about crop failures?" Duke Harrison fumbled with his papers again. "The reports are inconclusive, Your Majesty. Some areas show reduced yields, but others appear adequate." "Appear adequate?" the Queen repeated, her tone dropping several degrees. "Captain Kane, what have your patrols observed during their northern routes?" Lucas stepped forward, his boots clicking against the marble in perfect rhythm. "Your Majesty, the reports from my guards confirm significant crop damage in the eastern districts. The western areas show better results, but still below normal yields." Ambassador Martinez frowned. "With respect, Captain, military assessments may not capture the full economic picture." "Perhaps not," Lucas replied without breaking his professional demeanor. "But my men know the difference between healthy fields and failing ones." Queen Elena rose from her chair, causing every person in the chamber to stand immediately. She walked to the tall windows overlooking the palace gardens, her silhouette framed against the afternoon sunlight streaming through the glass. "Tell me about the children," she said quietly, not turning around. The question caught several nobles off guard. Duke Harrison cleared his throat. "Your Majesty? The children in the northern provinces. What are the reports about their condition?" Silence stretched across the chamber like a held breath. Captain Kane watched the nobles exchange uncomfortable glances, their earlier confidence evaporating like morning dew. Lord Bennett shifted in his seat. "We have not received specific reports about the children, Your Majesty." "No reports," Queen Elena repeated, still facing the window. "Captain Kane, do your patrols include observations about the civilian population?" "Yes, Your Majesty. Standard protocol includes welfare assessments during routine security sweeps." "And what have they observed?" Lucas straightened his shoulders. "Increased instances of malnourishment, Your Majesty, particularly among the youngest residents. Several villages have requested medical assistance." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Queen Elena turned slowly from the window, her expression serene but her eyes carrying a weight that made grown men shift uncomfortably in their seats. "Gentlemen," she said, her voice carrying the authority of generations of rulers, "it appears we have different priorities regarding the welfare of our subjects." Ambassador Martinez attempted to recover ground. "Your Majesty, surely economic stability must take precedence over individual hardships. The greater good requires difficult decisions." "Does it?" Queen Elena asked, moving back toward her chair but not sitting down. "Captain Kane, how many children live in the affected northern districts?" "Approximately 4,000, Your Majesty, based on the latest census data." 4,000 children, she repeated, letting the number settle over the chamber like falling snow. And we are discussing military intervention to collect taxes from their families during a time of crop failure and hunger. The silence that followed carried the weight of uncomfortable truth. Queen Elena's voice rang clear and measured through the chamber, each word carefully chosen like arrows finding their target. The assembled nobles remained standing, their earlier confidence dissolving under her steady gaze. I want detailed reports from every northern district, she continued, placing both hands on the back of her chair. Not economic assessments or tax collection summaries. I want to know how many families are struggling to feed their children, how many elderly residents lack adequate winter supplies, and how many communities are facing genuine hardship versus convenient excuses for tax avoidance.
Duke Harrison attempted to interject.
Your Majesty, such comprehensive surveys would require significant resources and time. The tax collection deadline approaches rapidly. Then we extend the deadline, Queen Elena replied without hesitation. Captain Kane, I want your most experienced sergeants to lead these assessment teams. They will report directly to you, and you will report directly to me. Understood, Your Majesty. Lucas nodded crisply, already mentally selecting which of his officers possessed the right combination of tactical skill and humanitarian judgment for such a mission. Lord Bennett's face reddened slightly. Your Majesty, with greatest respect, delaying tax collection could set a dangerous precedent. Other provinces might claim similar hardships to avoid their obligations. Let 'em, Queen Elena said, her voice carrying a finality that ended all debate. If other provinces face genuine hardship, they deserve the same consideration. If they fabricate claims for financial advantage, our investigations will reveal the truth. Ambassador Martinez cleared his throat nervously. The Royal Treasury cannot sustain indefinite delays in revenue collection. Our financial obligations to allied kingdoms and trade agreements require consistent income streams. Our financial obligations do not supersede our moral obligations to our own people, the Queen replied, moving around the table with measured steps. Captain Kane, what is the current status of our emergency relief supplies? Grain reserves stand at approximately 60% capacity, Your Majesty. Medical supplies are well stocked, and we maintain surplus winter clothing in the palace warehouses. Arrange immediate distribution to the most affected areas. Use military transport if necessary. The nobles exchanged glances filled with barely concealed alarm. Duke Harrison leaned forward. Your Majesty, depleting half our emergency reserves before winter fully arrives could leave us vulnerable to unforeseen circumstances. Leaving children to starve leaves our entire kingdom vulnerable to circumstances far more serious than empty warehouses. Queen Elena responded, her tone sharp enough to cut glass. A ruler who allows subjects to suffer while treasury vaults remain full rules over a kingdom built on hollow foundations. Lucas felt a surge of professional pride, watching his queen navigate the political minefield with such precision. 27 years of service had shown him many rulers who forgot that true strength came not from the fear they inspired, but from the loyalty they earned through genuine care for their people. Furthermore, Queen Elena continued, I want Captain Kane to establish permanent liaison positions in each affected district. His officers will maintain ongoing communication with local leaders and provide regular updates about community needs and recovery progress. Your Majesty, Lord Bennett protested, his voice rising slightly before he caught himself and modulated his tone. Stationing Royal Guard units permanently in civilian areas could create unnecessary tension and suggest we suspect local authorities of incompetence or disloyalty. Or it could demonstrate that we take our responsibility for citizen welfare seriously enough to maintain direct oversight, the Queen countered smoothly. Captain Kane, select officers who understand diplomacy as well as security protocols. They will serve as bridges between local communities and the royal administration. I have several candidates in mind, Your Majesty. Officers with civilian backgrounds who understand both military discipline and community relations. Queen Elena nodded approvingly. Excellent. Duke Harrison, I want you to coordinate with Captain Kane's liaison officers to establish communication channels that bypass traditional bureaucratic delays. When a community faces crisis, response time often determines the difference between hardship and tragedy. The Duke's expression suggested he had swallowed something particularly unpleasant, but he managed a respectful nod. As you wish, Your Majesty. Ambassador Martinez, you will work with our financial advisors to restructure the tax collection timeline. Instead of fixed deadlines, we will implement flexible schedules based on actual community capacity, rather than arbitrary calendar dates. The ambassador's diplomatic training kicked in, smoothing his features into professional acceptance despite his obvious reservations. I will begin drafting the necessary policy modifications immediately, Your Majesty. Good. Lord Bennett, you will oversee the logistics of relief distribution. Work with Captain Kane to ensure supplies reach those who need them most, rather than those with the loudest voices or strongest political connections. Lord Bennett's face had returned to its normal color, though tension remained evident in his posture. I understand, Your Majesty. Queen Elena returned to her chair, but remained standing behind it, her hands resting lightly on the carved wooden back. The afternoon sunlight streaming through the tall windows created a natural spotlight around her figure, emphasizing the authority she wielded not through intimidation, but through unwavering moral conviction. The transformation in the chamber's atmosphere was palpable. What had begun as a routine administrative meeting about tax collection had evolved into something far more significant. The Queen had taken what her advisors viewed as a simple economic problem and revealed the complex humanitarian crisis lurking beneath the surface. Captain Kane observed the subtle shifts in body language around the table. The nobles were no longer comfortable, but they were learning. Sometimes the most important lessons came not from books or experience, but from watching true leadership in action. Gentlemen, Queen Elena said, her voice carrying both warmth and steel, effective governance requires us to see beyond numbers in ledgers and percentages in reports. Every statistic represents real people living real lives, facing real struggles. The silence that followed her words held weight and meaning that no amount of debate could have achieved. Captain Kane maintained his position near the chamber doors, but his attention focused entirely on Queen Elena as she addressed the assembled nobles. The afternoon light continued streaming through the tall windows, casting long shadows across the polished table where documents and reports lay scattered like fallen leaves. I want to share something with all of you, Queen Elena began, her voice carrying a different quality now, more personal yet no less authoritative. Last month, during my visit to the eastern markets, I encountered a young girl selling apples from a small basket. Duke Harrison leaned forward slightly, his earlier defensive posture softening as curiosity replaced resistance. She could not have been more than 8 years old, the Queen continued, moving slowly around the table, making eye contact with each advisor as she spoke. Her clothes were clean but patched in several places. Her shoes had worn thin at the soles, but her smile was genuine when she offered me her best apple. Ambassador Martinez set down his pen, giving the Queen his complete attention. I purchased several apples and asked about her family. Her father works the northern grain fields we have been discussing today. Her mother takes in sewing to supplement their income. The child sells apples after her school lessons to help buy winter coats for her 2 younger brothers. Lord Bennett's expression had grown thoughtful, his earlier agitation replaced by something approaching understanding. When I asked if her family had enough food for winter, she paused before answering. The pause lasted only a moment, but it spoke volumes. She said they would manage because her parents always found ways to make things work. Queen Elena stopped beside Captain Kane, not looking at him but drawing strength from his steady presence. Lucas remained perfectly still, recognizing this as one of those pivotal moments that would be remembered long after the participants had left the chamber. That child's pause contained a more honest assessment of the northern provinces than all the reports and surveys we have received combined, the Queen said, her voice gaining intensity without becoming louder. She knew her family faced hardship, but she also knew that admitting weakness might bring shame upon her parents. The nobles remained silent, each processing the implications of what they were hearing. Captain Kane, Queen Elena said, turning toward her head of security, tell these gentlemen what you observed during your last patrol through the eastern districts. Lucas straightened, choosing his words carefully. Your Majesty, the children in that region display remarkable resilience but also concerning signs of nutritional stress. They continue attending school and helping their families, but medical assessments indicate many are not receiving adequate calories for proper growth and development. And what did your officers recommend? Immediate supplemental nutrition programs, Your Majesty. Not charity, but structured support that preserves family dignity while addressing genuine need. Queen Elena nodded, then addressed the table again. Gentlemen, we face a choice that will define not only our current policies but our legacy as leaders. We can view the northern provinces as sources of revenue that happen to contain inconvenient human complications, or we can recognize them as communities of our subjects whose welfare directly impacts the strength and stability of our entire kingdom. Duke Harrison cleared his throat respectfully. Your Majesty, how do you propose we balance immediate humanitarian concerns with long-term financial obligations? By understanding that they are not opposing forces, the Queen replied immediately. Good. A province filled with healthy, prosperous families will generate far more sustainable revenue than one pushed to the breaking point by unrealistic demands. Short-term financial pressure that damages long-term economic capacity represents poor planning, not sound fiscal policy. Ambassador Martinez nodded slowly. The economic literature does support sustainable development approaches over aggressive extraction models, Your Majesty. Moreover, Queen Elena continued, warming to her theme, a population that views their government as genuinely concerned for their welfare becomes a source of strength rather than resentment. Captain Kane, what have your officers observed about civilian cooperation during security operations in areas where we have provided genuine assistance versus areas where we have maintained purely administrative relationships? Dramatic differences in cooperation levels, Your Majesty. Communities that have received genuine support provide valuable intelligence about potential threats, while those that view us primarily as tax collectors tend to offer minimal assistance even when faced with external dangers. Lord Bennett leaned back in his chair, his expression suggesting internal calculations were taking place. Your Majesty, if we restructure our approach along the lines you suggest, what timeline would you envision for implementation? Immediate implementation for emergency relief measures, Queen Elena replied without hesitation. Captain Kane will have assessment teams deployed within 48 hours. Relief supplies will begin distribution as soon as transport can be arranged. Commissioner Martinez will have preliminary policy modifications completed within 1 week. The decisiveness of her response left no room for further debate about timing or feasibility. Longer-term structural changes will be developed over the coming months, with input from local leaders and based on data gathered by our assessment teams. But the humanitarian response begins now, today, before this meeting ends. Captain Kane felt a familiar surge of professional satisfaction. This was why he had devoted his career to royal service, not for the pageantry or prestige, but for moments like this, when true leadership transformed good intentions into immediate action that would improve real lives. Are there any practical concerns about implementation that we need to address immediately? Queen Elena asked, scanning the faces around the table. The question carried both invitation and challenge. She was offering the nobles an opportunity to contribute constructively, rather than simply comply with orders. But the underlying expectation remained clear. Duke Harrison spoke first. Transport coordination will require careful scheduling to avoid disrupting existing trade routes while ensuring priority access for relief supplies. Acceptable concern. Captain Kane, can your logistics coordinators handle transport scheduling? Absolutely, Your Majesty. We maintain detailed routing databases for exactly these types of operations. The afternoon was drawing toward evening, but the energy in the chamber had transformed completely from the tentative defensive atmosphere that had prevailed earlier. Queen Elena moved back to her chair, but instead of sitting down, she placed both hands flat on the table and leaned forward slightly, bringing her face closer to the level of the seated nobles. Gentlemen, I want to be absolutely clear about something, she said, her voice carrying quiet intensity that demanded complete attention. The decision we have made today is not temporary policy adjustment. This represents a fundamental shift in how we approach governance. The words hung in the air with the weight of historical significance. From this day forward, humanitarian considerations will hold equal weight with financial considerations in all policy decisions. Economic efficiency that comes at the cost of human suffering will no longer be acceptable in my administration. Duke Harrison shifted in his seat, not from discomfort, but from the recognition that he was witnessing something historically important. Your Majesty, such a comprehensive policy shift will require extensive documentation and formal adoption through the Royal Council. Then prepare the documentation, Queen Elena replied smoothly. But understand that the implementation begins regardless of paperwork timelines. We will formalize what we have already begun, not delay action while bureaucrats debate language and formatting. Ambassador Martinez picked up his pen again, but this time to take notes rather than sign predetermined documents. Your Majesty, will there be opportunities for provincial representatives to provide input during the formalization process? Not only opportunities, but requirements, the Queen said, straightening to her full height again. Local leaders will be essential partners in developing sustainable solutions rather than passive recipients of royal decisions made in distant chambers. Lord Bennett nodded approvingly. That approach should help ensure policies remain practical and effective rather than theoretical. Exactly. Queen Elena smiled, the first genuinely warm expression she had shown during the entire meeting. Captain Kane, I want you to personally select the first team of assessment officers. Choose individuals who understand that their primary mission is listening and learning, not investigating or judging. I have the perfect candidates in mind, Your Majesty. Officers with diverse backgrounds who possess both analytical skills and genuine empathy for civilian concerns. Outstanding. Duke Harrison, you will coordinate with Captain Kane to establish communication protocols that ensure information flows quickly and accurately between assessment teams and policymakers here in the capital. Duke Harrison straightened his papers, his earlier nervousness replaced by focused professional energy. I will have preliminary protocols drafted by tomorrow morning, Your Majesty. Ambassador Martinez, your financial restructuring proposals will need to account for the fact that we are transitioning from extraction-based taxation to partnership-based revenue generation. The mathematics will be different, but the results should prove far more sustainable. The ambassador nodded thoughtfully. I will need to consult with economic advisors who specialize in development economics rather than traditional fiscal policy, Your Majesty. Consult with whoever provides the best expertise, Queen Elena replied. This is not the time for conventional approaches to unconventional challenges. Captain Kane observed the transformation taking place around the table. What had begun as resistance to policy change had evolved into collaborative problem-solving. The Queen had not simply imposed her will through royal authority, but had systematically demonstrated why her approach would produce better results for everyone involved. Lord Bennett, your role in overseeing relief distribution will require coordination with local religious leaders, community organizations, and informal networks that may not appear in official records, but often prove most effective at reaching families in genuine need. Lord Bennett nodded vigorously. Comprehensive distribution requires comprehensive knowledge of community structures. Precisely. Queen Elena finally took her seat, the gesture signaling that the formal portion of the meeting was concluding. Gentlemen, we have covered substantial ground this afternoon. Before we adjourn, are there immediate questions about responsibilities or timelines? The chamber fell quiet, but it was the comfortable silence of shared understanding rather than the tense quiet of unresolved conflict. Duke Harrison spoke first. Your Majesty, I believe we all understand our respective roles and the urgency of implementation. Good. Then let us conclude with this understanding. What we have discussed today represents more than policy change. It represents a commitment to leadership that serves people rather than simply ruling them. The distinction was subtle but profound, and everyone in the room recognized its significance. Captain Kane, please remain for a few minutes after the others depart. I have additional instructions regarding security protocols for the assessment teams. As the nobles gathered their papers and prepared to leave, Queen Elena remained seated, watching each man file out of the chamber with expressions far different from those they had worn upon entering. The heavy oak doors closed behind the last departing noble, leaving Queen Elena alone with Captain Kane in the vast council chamber. Afternoon sunlight slanted through the tall windows at a sharper angle now, casting different shadows across the polished marble floor. Lucas, she said, dropping the formal address now that they were alone. Walk with me to the eastern windows. Captain Kane fell into step beside his queen, their footsteps echoing softly in the empty chamber. When they reached the windows overlooking the palace gardens, Queen Elena stood quietly for a moment, gazing out at the carefully tended grounds where servants moved among the flower beds preparing for evening. "What did you observe about the nobles' reactions during that meeting?" she asked, without turning from the window. "Initial resistance based on preconceived notions about fiscal responsibility," Lucas replied honestly. "Gradual acceptance as you demonstrated the practical advantages of your approach. Final commitment once they understood you were offering partnership rather than demanding compliance." "And what did you think of my performance?" The question carried subtle undertones that suggested this was not merely seeking validation, but genuinely requesting professional assessment from someone whose judgment she trusted completely. "Masterful, Your Majesty. You transformed potential conflict into collaborative problem-solving without compromising your core objectives or appearing weak to those who might mistake compassion for indecision." Queen Elena turned to face him, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "You noticed the strategic elements beneath the humanitarian concerns. Both were genuine, Your Majesty. The humanitarian concerns drove the strategic decisions, not the other way around. That authenticity was what ultimately convinced the nobles to embrace, rather than simply accept your policies." "Good. I need you to understand that distinction because the assessment teams you select will need to embody the same authenticity. They cannot simply be well-trained soldiers following orders to appear compassionate. They must genuinely care about the welfare of the people they will be evaluating." Lucas nodded thoughtfully. "That requirement will limit my candidate pool significantly, but I believe it will also ensure much higher quality results." "Exactly. I would rather send 3 teams of officers who truly understand their mission than 30 teams going through the motions of humanitarianism while thinking like accountants." Queen Elena moved away from the window, walking slowly across the chamber toward her chair, though she made no move to sit down again. "Tell me about Sergeant Patricia Brooks," she said, the apparent subject change catching Lucas's attention. "One of my most capable officers, Your Majesty. 7 years of service, exemplary record, extensive civilian background before joining the Guard. She worked as a teacher before enlisting. And Captain Andrew Sullivan? 12 years of service, Your Majesty. Former merchant background, excellent at building rapport with civilian populations, speaks 3 languages fluently." Those are the kinds of officers I want leading the assessment teams. People who understand civilian life from personal experience, not just professional training. Queen Elena stopped beside the table where documents from the afternoon meeting still lay scattered across the polished wood surface. "Lucas, I need you to understand something that I could not say in front of the others. This policy shift is not just about the northern provinces, or even about current tax collection difficulties." She picked up one of the reports, scanning its contents briefly before setting it down again. "I have been receiving intelligence reports suggesting that several neighboring kingdoms are experiencing significant internal unrest due to economic pressures combined with perceived governmental indifference to civilian hardship."
Captain Kane straightened slightly,
His professional instincts engaging as the conversation moved into security territory. 3 separate kingdoms have experienced popular uprisings in the past 18 months, Queen Elena continued. In each case, the initial trigger was economic hardship, but the underlying cause was loss of confidence in leadership that appeared to prioritize revenue over welfare. Are we facing similar risks, Your Majesty? Not currently, but preventive action is far more effective than reactive measures. By demonstrating genuine concern for our subjects before they reach crisis points, we build the loyalty and trust that prevent internal instability. The strategic implications became clear to Lucas immediately. So the humanitarian policies also serve national security interests. They serve both simultaneously, which makes them far stronger than policies designed to address only one concern at the expense of the other. Queen Elena moved back toward the windows, but this time she stopped at a different vantage point that offered views of the palace courtyard where guards were conducting their evening routine. "Your assessment teams will be gathering more than information about local hardships, Lucas. They will be identifying potential sources of instability before they develop into actual problems." "Understood, Your Majesty. I will brief the team leaders about the broader security implications of their missions." Good, but ensure they understand that security concerns must never override humanitarian objectives. The moment civilians perceive our relief efforts as intelligence gathering disguised as charity, we lose both the humanitarian benefits and the security advantages. Captain Kane nodded, appreciating the delicate balance required. The authenticity we discussed earlier becomes even more critical in that context. Precisely. Which brings me to my final instructions for tonight. Queen Elena turned back toward him, her expression growing more serious. I want you to establish a direct communication line between yourself and the assessment team leaders that bypasses normal reporting channels. Your Majesty, if team leaders discover information that suggests immediate threats or urgent situations requiring rapid response, they need to be able to reach you directly without waiting for reports to work their way through bureaucratic processes. That makes sense for emergency situations, Your Majesty. It also creates accountability. If assessment teams report problems that require immediate attention, I want to know that you received the information promptly and that appropriate action was taken quickly. The implication was clear, without being stated directly. Some problems could not afford to get lost in administrative delays or bureaucratic risk aversion. I will establish secure communication protocols within 24 hours, Your Majesty. Excellent. Now, regarding the selection criteria for assessment team leaders, Queen Elena walked back to the table and picked up a pen, pulling a blank sheet of paper toward herself. I want you to prioritize officers who have demonstrated initiative in previous assignments, particularly situations where they needed to make judgment calls about civilian welfare without specific prior instructions. She began writing as she spoke, creating a document that would serve as formal guidance for the selection process. Look for individuals who have successfully navigated complex situations where military protocols needed to be adapted to civilian contexts without abandoning professional standards. Lucas watched her write, noting the precision of her handwriting and the careful organization of her thoughts on paper. Include officers who have linguistic abilities that match the regions they will be assigned to, but do not automatically exclude excellent candidates who lack language skills if they possess other critical qualifications. Understood, Your Majesty. And Lucas, she said, looking up from her writing, make it clear to every selected officer that their mission success will be measured not by the reports they generate, but by the improvements they help create in the communities they assess. The distinction was subtle but significant, emphasizing results over documentation. That should encourage proactive problem-solving rather than passive observation, Lucas observed. Exactly. I want officers who see problems and immediately begin thinking about solutions, not just documenting issues for others to address later. Queen Elena finished writing and handed the document to Captain Kane. These guidelines should help you identify the right personnel for what may be the most important domestic mission we have undertaken during my reign. Lucas scanned the document quickly, noting the careful balance between specific requirements and flexible criteria that allowed for individual judgment in candidate selection. Your Majesty, how many assessment teams do you envision deploying initially? Start with 6 teams of 3 officers each. That provides enough coverage for immediate needs while maintaining manageable oversight and communication requirements. And if initial results suggest we need additional teams, then we expand rapidly. But I prefer to begin with excellent small-scale operations rather than adequate large-scale efforts. The conversation was interrupted by a soft knock on the chamber doors. Captain Kane moved immediately toward the sound, his hand instinctively moving toward his ceremonial weapon before recognizing the specific pattern of knocks used by palace staff. "Enter," Queen Elena called out. A young page stepped into the chamber, bowing deeply before speaking. "Your Majesty, dinner is prepared when you are ready." "Thank you, Marcus. Please inform the kitchen staff that I will be ready in approximately 10 minutes. The page bowed again and departed, leaving the Queen and Captain alone once more. "Lucas, we have covered everything essential for tonight. Tomorrow morning, I want you to begin the selection process immediately. Have your preliminary team assignments ready for my review by tomorrow evening." "Yes, Your Majesty." "And remember, this conversation and everything we discussed about security implications remains confidential until you brief your selected team leaders." Captain Kane straightened to full attention. "Understood completely, Your Majesty." Queen Elena smiled, the formal tension of the long afternoon finally beginning to ease from her posture. Thank you, Lucas. Your professionalism and judgment continue to be invaluable. It is my honor to serve your majesty. As Captain Kane moved toward the chamber doors, Queen Elena called out one final instruction. And Lucas, make sure your assessment teams understand that they represent not just royal authority, but royal compassion. The people they encounter should feel proud that their queen cares enough to send her finest officers to understand their needs. They will understand, Your Majesty. I will make certain of it. As the heavy oak doors closed behind Captain Kane, Queen Elena remained alone in the council chamber, surrounded by the lingering echoes of an afternoon that had transformed routine administrative business into the foundation for comprehensive policy reform. The evening light streaming through the tall windows cast long shadows across the chamber floor, painting geometric patterns that shifted slowly as the sun continued its descent toward the horizon. Queen Elena stood perfectly still for a moment, processing the magnitude of what had been accomplished and what lay ahead. Tomorrow would bring new challenges as the implementation of their ambitious plans began in earnest. Assessment teams would need to be selected, briefed, and deployed. Relief supplies would need to be organized and transported. Communication protocols would need to be established and tested. But tonight, for just a few minutes longer, she allowed herself to feel satisfaction about an afternoon's work that had proven effective leadership could transform potential crisis into opportunity for genuine improvement in the lives of her subjects. The soft sound of her footsteps echoed through the chamber as she gathered the documents from the afternoon meeting, organizing them carefully for review during the evening meal when she would begin planning the next day's activities. As Queen Elena reached the chamber doors, she paused for one final look back at the room where important decisions had been made and crucial commitments had been established. The afternoon had begun with nobles concerned primarily about tax collection efficiency and concluded with those same advisors committed to comprehensive humanitarian reform. The transformation had required patience, strategic thinking, and unwavering moral conviction, but the results would benefit thousands of subjects throughout the northern provinces and establish precedents that would guide royal policy for generations to come. Queen Elena stepped through the doorway into the corridor beyond, where palace guards stood at attention and torches flickered in their wall-mounted brackets, casting dancing shadows against the stone walls. The real work would begin tomorrow, but the foundation had been laid with precision and care that would ensure lasting success for everyone involved.